Welcome to another exciting SecurityMetrics news. I'm your host, Heff, and with me is...
This is Forrest. How you doing?
Hi, Forrest. Welcome. It's been a busy week.
Has it ever, man? I feel bad for all the folks working incident response out there right now.
Boy, I'll tell you, Forrest, this week has been nuts, and it's like in the history of everything we've ever done. I feel like this past week, we don't often see software supply chain attacks. So to see it this big on this much of a scale, it's primarily going to be the focus of our conversation this week.
Yeah, there's just massive events that are unignorable.
And as always, if you could like to follow us along, please do. If we get enough likes here, I think I'll whip out the Chris Farley impersonation. What do you think there, Forrest?
I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Well, with that in mind, let's kick it off. DJ, if you're there, man, go ahead and play us our song. All right, welcome back. Forrest, if I had to pick out a book this week to read, I think it would be the book by Skeletor called What Would Skeletor Do? Have you ever read this book?
I have not.
It's probably one of the best books out there. I mean, you're talking about a huge, the scope and the scale of this insanity this past week with SolarWinds and FireEye and all the government agencies that have been breached. You know, if we don't talk about it this week, I would feel really bad about not helping our clients. And there's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of pieces to this puzzle. The scale and the scope I mentioned is huge, but the adversaries themselves, wow. I mean, you want to talk about sophistication? They've been plotting this a long time.
Oh yeah. It's looks like it's been going back several months now at least. So yeah, just waiting and waiting for the right time to attack.
Well, I know like when FireEye got hit last week, we all kind of in the community, we said, okay, this is just the start of something much, much bigger. And luckily FireEye was first on the scene to experience it. Luckily for us, and gladly I'm so glad that they actually experienced it and were able to kind of get the ball rolling with notifications and remediation that needs to happen. So that happened last week. And then I don't know about you, if you had any friends or family or anybody ask you, they said, is this just the start of something else? I had a bunch of people ask me that. And I said, absolutely. It's going to get a lot crazier in the news. And sure as heck, it did.
Had a few people ask me about different firms that use, for instance, like SolarWinds, which we'll be getting into shortly here. So yeah, it's been all over the place.
Well, we should probably start it off with talking about the SolarWinds event. Obviously, they put out this press release by the SEC, and we put it up on the screen for everyone to take a look at. It's really important that you read this press release because there's a lot of stuff going on in there. We actually underlined and highlighted one of the most important things as part of this press release. Anytime a company gets breached and they have to make this announcement to the SEC and get it on record, that's a big deal. That's an important deal. That means the scale and the size and the scope of this thing is gigantic. Now, the thing that caught me most off guard, Forrest, and I don't know when you read the press release if you saw this, SolarWinds said, it's Orion products. We think something happened in updates between March and June. And then you read all the way down, SolarWinds is not currently aware that this vulnerability exists in any other products. So they're calling it a vulnerability, but yet when you read the news and you see the news and you talk to people in the community, it's more of not a vulnerability, but a threat actor involved.
When we get into it, as far as the credentials and things like that goes, it just seems more negligence than a vulnerability in my mind.
And I think we should talk about, it's an evolving event. It's an evolving story. We don't have all the news. We're trying to put together the pieces of the puzzle, exactly what the heck is happening out there. So what we thought we'd do is we take you back in time. Let's start with December 13th. That is the big date that Reuters, this writer, Chris Bing, he's got a pretty good reputation out there for telling the news like it is, not injecting anything that's irrelevant. And he actually broke the news story about the Treasury Department being compromised by a sophisticated adversary. And anytime you hear the word sophisticated adversary, that usually means that they're doing a lot of things behind the scenes to take advantage and to execute on their plan. So literally felt like a couple hours later, the Washington Post released a story And it was talking about SolarWinds and their Orion products, which we'll talk more about here in just a minute. And then on top of all that, they talked about the Treasury Department, a lot of other, everything being connected back to SolarWinds Orion. And then on top of all that, the Washington Post article was the one, I think they were the first ones to drop a name, a threat group. And they talked about APT 29, which is essentially Cozy Bear Russia, a Russian adversary. Cozy Bear, some of you may recognize that name because that was in the news a while ago, back when the Obama administration was around. Do you remember that name, Cozy Bear?
Oh, there's so many bears. I lose track of them. Fozzie Bear, Cozy Bear.
Yeah, there is a lot of bears. Well, Fozzie Bear's the good one, but Cozy Bear's not. And the Obama administration actually got hit by Cozy Bear in their email stuff a couple years ago. So APT 29 is allegedly being attributed to this this sophisticated adversary that's been involved with Orion. So what we want to do, obviously, is take you through the story and the history behind everything that's going on. We should probably start at the top and explain who exactly is SolarWinds. Have you heard of SolarWinds? Have you ever used them in any of your past lives?
I've not used them, but it's my understanding is it's network management. So SNMP on steroids. So taking it's kind of interesting. We've been talking about attackers targeting the software development lifecycle. And now we're starting to see kind of that infrastructure lifecycle being targeted now. So kind of almost two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, and it's confusing out there. If you hear the word NMS and you're in the world of cybersecurity or IT, you may also have heard the word NSM, and that's where you might get confused. Well, what is SolarWinds and what's the difference? So when you hear the word network security monitoring versus network management system, what pops to mind in your mind, Forrest?
Security monitoring, that's my bread and butter. That's what we're doing every day. As opposed to the management where you're deploying and standing boxes up, administering them, making changes to accounts, passwords, all that sort of stuff. So that's more the nitty gritty as opposed to combing through massive amounts of logs and packet traces and things like that.
And that's the thing about Orion. Orion is an NMS. And I feel like I'm dyslexic here. NMS, Network Management System. And that is the tool that monitors, that manages the servers, the networks, the workstations. So if a threat actor wanted to really take advantage of a system, that's the crown jewel right there to go after, assuming that you can get some pretty good access to it. So these tools, these NMS tools are used by a lot of organizations. I mean, you're talking 300,000 customers use Orion products. And when NMS gets popped, oh my gosh, and you think about the depth of all the customers that use NMS, it's massive. And we'll talk about who some of those folks are that actually use NMS. But these tools are so used, and they're used for everything from IT management to monitoring systems. So why? That's always the question for us. Why go after NMS? And we kind of briefly talked about it, but what is so valuable about the network management system?
It's a pretty juicy target. I mean, if you're talking about a system that is delegating access or standing up user accounts and credentials on other systems, or for instance, sometimes they're used for managing ACLs, so access lists and white lists for what's allowed to talk to what. If you're able to get in there and make those changes, you can basically say, well, I want to be able to access all these machines using this account, or have this place or this system talk to this network. Basically, the sky's the limit at that point.
Yeah, and you think about all the tools that communicate with so many devices. You think about accessing the crown jewels and then pivoting from there to other areas in the network. Depending on the configuration settings of NMS, you essentially can have just read-only access too, and that's a problem too. So even if the threat actor wasn't able to actually take control of a client's environment with Orion, they could potentially see a lot of things, and just having that knowledge, that threat intelligence of how a network is set up and how it's designed can be absolutely detrimental. And especially when you talk about the type of threats that can come from compromising the NMS, specifically man-in-the-middle opportunities.
Oh yeah, there's all kinds of ways that this could be exploited, whether it's going through data stores, accessing various network storage solutions, cloning traffic and reading it straight off the wire. There's all kinds of fun stuff that an attacker could really take advantage of there.
So when it comes to this Orion product, I was blown away, Forrest, about the number of companies that use it. I didn't realize that almost all of the military branches use it. NASA, NSA, Department of Commerce, the Department of Treasury. Did you know that they were used in that many places?
It was nutty. Seeing the statistics, it was something like over 425 of the Fortune 500 are their customers. It's pretty astounding, just the sheer size and amount of market penetration they have, and that's going to make for a long December for a lot of companies.
The song that comes to mind is that Counting Crows song, "Long December." Have you heard that song?
I have not.
Oh, Forrest, that is the theme song for 2020 right here. But October 27th, an analyst call was held at SolarWinds, and it was amazing to me. I actually underlined the quote. We're going to put the quote up on the screen here. We don't think anyone else in the market is really even close in terms of the breadth of coverage that we have. He literally said, "We manage everyone's network gear." You're talking about incredible dominance in the market, and that was used against everyone in this incredible spy campaign that's out there. So, wow. I mean, I just, to have that quote come out and then now to look back on October 27th as a red letter day in the history of this breach is pretty eye-opening. All right, let's flip gears. Let's actually talk about the way it was done and what happened with this attack, because again, it's an evolving story. We don't know all the details. We're trying to piece together. Some of this research is our own. Some of this research came from other people. Understanding that it is a software supply chain attack. Basically, hackers, they gained access to a lot of different high-profile clients, essentially. And they've been doing this for months. You talk about secretly monitoring email accounts and exchanges at different clients. And then when you actually look at how how this evolved using a malicious update, basically we're gonna dive into how this happened. And when you think about a great way, and this has happened lots of times, where the software vendor they push out updates all the time, and when they push out those updates, you don't know how secure those updates are. And if you're not testing them in a sandbox environment, they could potentially have malware, and that's exactly what happened here.
Yeah, it really comes down to who do you trust? At the end of the day, you have to extend your trust somewhere. You can't be etching your own chips to make your own processors. You got to depend on somebody else to be doing that. So whether it's a hardware supply chain, software supply chain, you're trusting somebody to make sure that this is getting done and done right. And so, yeah, you have things like the software repositories where you're downloading your applications from, app stores, things of that nature, all kind of depend on that. Who is it that you're trusting?
So with this SolarWinds, the way, as we understand it, the way the malware was deployed, it came from an update from SolarWinds' very own servers. So imagine that you have a piece of software from a company, you're updating, you're trying to do your patching, and you get this update and you think it's legit, but it was actually compromised by the threat actors. And what was crazy, Forrest, and I was blown away, that the certificate was actually digitally signed. So if you're downloading this update, you think it's a legit update. And 18,000 customers downloaded this update in March and April of this past year.
Yeah, it was virtually undetectable at that point. How many people are actually verifying signatures on the packages that they download and comparing it against the certificates that have been signed into these by these certificate authorities? It's not very many people, and even in those cases where people were doing that, it would appear totally valid. So this is very deadly in breaking that web of trust.
And we should mention that this certificate was issued by Symantec I've been getting a lot of folks asking me, do I think the SolarWinds certificate will be revoked? And of course, we don't know the answers yet, but I would imagine that could potentially be on the table at this point. I have seen in the news too. Have you seen about SolarWinds being raided by the feds coming down and investigating their offices? Have you seen that?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting stuff, especially when you start to get into the full depth of how that could play out. That, for instance, the one I've seen a lot of people throwing around was that Dominion Voting was a client of theirs, and they've actually since removed the SolarWinds logo from their site, which is pretty funny that SolarWinds used to have this big list of, hey, here's all these big name companies that use us, and they actually went and took that down. But too little, too late. People have already archived that. So it's an interesting exercise in wanting to boast from the rooftops. We're used by all the biggest names, but then ultimately that can also come back to be used against you.
Now, if you go back in time, last year, this security researcher, Vinod Kumar, he actually told Reuters that he alerted SolarWinds that anyone could access SolarWinds update server. And all they had to use was the password SolarWinds123. I can't make this up. So not only did SolarWinds know about it, and they knew that you could actually access the update server simply by using this password, but any attacker, had that got out in the wild, which apparently it did, any attacker could have very easily then went in and compromised SolarWinds update server and then pushed out these malicious updates, and that's what happened in March. So this will be interesting how it plays out in the courts, because if you knew about it and you didn't do anything about it, you're going to be in big trouble. And this is going to have really incredible long-term fallouts for SolarWinds. Hopefully they survive.
Oh yeah, the hard-coded password, default password, is always something that I grimace at, and especially something as simple as that. I could be a little bit more understanding of something that appeared to be randomly generated, but for something that is that easily brute forceable, it's pretty hard to overlook.
Now, we don't know all the details. It's an evolving story. Some of it's still being sorted out with how the actual breach took place. We know some details, like we mentioned, the updates being compromised, but software supply chain attacks, they do happen. We don't see them too often, and we obviously see a lot of state-backed advanced persistent threats that are targeting vendors. They're masquerading these updates. What's the challenge right now for the folks that are involved in researching this and figuring out what the heck happened is attribution and figuring out who is attributed to this. Now, the news media has already jumped all over APT29 and Cozy Bear and attributing it to Russian, but it's possible that there could be Chinese attribution too. And if it's Russian, there could be things like PETA and Bad Rabbit, and if it's Chinese attribution, it could be Shadowpad, Shadowhammer, Cleaner. So again, we don't know all the details. So I'm very curious of how it actually happened, and I'm really looking forward to that part of the story.
Yeah, digital forensics and attribution is one of those areas that is just it's an endless rabbit hole, and I definitely do not envy the people who are having to go through and try and tear this down bit by bit and trace it back to where it came from.
So, Forrest, the nice thing about that happened here is, of course, FireEye, they have been amazing. I mean, a big credit out to FireEye for the way they handled the breach.
Oh, yeah.
They, of course, themselves were victims, but they released a lot of IOCs, indicators of compromise, a lot of domains. I know we've been trying to operationalize some of this stuff.
Yeah. I was really impressed with how quickly they released the detections for their own tooling. Just even the sheer number, I think it was like over 300 within the first day. Just immediately full responsibility, just an amazing response. I was thoroughly impressed with that, and just the amount of domains and IP ranges and things that they've put out there for people to keep an eye on has been awesome.
Absolutely. And the other thing that comes to mind now is with FireEye releasing some of these IOCs is I don't know if you saw this too, is threat actors like to pivot. They're obviously going to pivot from what happened with the bad update from Orion, and I've seen a lot of stuff about threat actors bypassing the multi-factor protections offered by a variety of services such as Duo. I've read about this on the news as well. So if a threat actor could potentially pivot and get into something like Outlook, and we've seen stories, we've included a link about this story where they were able to basically steal the A key from Duo and then get access running through Outlook, the web app. And basically, from there you can get into 365. Now we should mention that Microsoft has said they have not been compromised, that they have not experienced anything like that whatsoever. But I mean, if you're able to generate the A key and generate a cookie, wow! I mean, just think about all the things that you could potentially get access to. It's pretty maddening.
Oh yeah, yeah. At that point, you're looking at rolling TOTP seeds. You're looking at SAML tokens. You're looking at all kinds of stuff that needs to be just nuked and remade. You don't know to what extent that may have been compromised, or if that's something that they may try and leverage against you later.
Now, we've included the information about the Velexity and their ability to, their observations from other researchers that really these threat actors are so highly skilled, and that the fact that they can return repeatedly into a client's environment. And in the Velexity article that we've included, it was amazing. They were talking about this think tank agent, this think tank client, and the think tank thought that the group had been ejected, that what they believe attributed to APT-29 and Cozy Bear, they thought they got rid of them, but actually the attackers were able to remain undetected for several years in the environment. So Washington Post article, New York Times article about this, essentially saying it doesn't matter who your MFA provider is. If in this case it was Duo, but it could have been anyone. If you're not doing threat modeling out there and you're not looking at what's actually happening and trying to predict and see how the threat actors can move in your environment, you're going to be in big trouble. I mean, you're going to have some serious problems.
Oh yeah, yeah. Especially if you have the false assumption that everything's been cleaned up, and not everything has been. That's their foot right back in the door.
So kind of wrapping this up now, what can you do about it? I mean, where the story's currently at and how it keeps evolving. I know that SecurityWinds has put out a nice security advisory. They do have that hot fix that's out there. If you're using any one of these products that on the screen right now, you really want to make sure you're getting that hot fix in place. And really, it doesn't matter, no matter what SolarWinds product you're using, you should be doing threat modeling on any of those products. So there is this hot fix, there is this advisory out there. There's a lot of other things that you should be doing as well, and that includes reading the CISSP advisories. I know we just got a notice about another advisory. Forrest, that's one of those things where, even if it doesn't matter what, if you're in the private sector or public sector, those CISSP advisories are mission critical that you're on.
Most definitely, yeah. Being able to tap into those fusion centers and having that knowledge sharing is very, very important.
They in the news is saying it's APT-29, it's Russian, it's Cozy Bear, but the reality is until FireEye has enough attribution, they are calling it UNC 2542, so you can follow that hashtag. And of course, I would absolutely read all of the different advisories and stuff that's out there as well.
Yeah, and in my opinion, I think attribution is that's a later down the line thing. As it stands right now, we're just looking to get the holes plugged up. Make sure that no more bad behavior is happening, and that we're shored up and secured against it, and then we can try and sift through the ashes and really figure out, okay, where did this come from? What were their objectives? Et cetera, et cetera.
So, you talk about best practices, and if you're going to be deploying updates out there, no matter if you're the vendor releasing the updates or you yourself in your environment have to do the updates and the patching, there's some things you can do. We've included 4 bullet points up here. Best practices really is what it comes down to. Number 1 is delayed execution. So, understanding how this malware operates, it's checking file systems, it's checking the timestamps, it's ensuring that the product's been deployed really between 12 to 14 days, and delaying the execution prevents the use of any kind of pre-deployment test of the malware itself in sandboxes. And this, of course, leads to avoiding detection. So that's an important element here under best practices. Another area that you need to be thinking about is staging your updates. So a lot of folks, they get the update, they trust them, and they just willy-nilly just go ahead and start deploying the update. Have you ever done this, Forrest, where you leave the update in a staging environment?
Staging is very important for sure. It's typically you try and have multiple sort of tiers. So you have your move fast break stuff. My local instance, I'm just going to do whatever with, and you have your staging environment. Step up from that, and then eventually that will get promoted up to production. But depending on what your organization's timetable is, that time range may vary. I've seen places that will do it on like 3-week cycles. I've seen it a matter of 3 days where they just fail over quickly between the two different environments. So it's all very dependent on what your development and implementation lifecycle looks like, and having some time to pump the brakes and see if there's any further kinks that need to be worked out is always a good idea, in my opinion.
What I like about staging your update is it gives, it really makes that time that you're making sure that the malware is not beaconing out there. So another thing that you can do, another best practice, is anti-sandbox behavior. So unless that malware is joined to a domain, then what you're going to have to deal with is the malware not executing. So if your malware is in sandboxes and not domain joined, it's a good best practice. It's something simple that everyone really should be doing. And then the final issue is the DNS resolution and the IP address checks. So if the malware is able to resolve to a domain, to a private IP, the malware will also not execute. So that's another best practice to consider.
Yeah, being able to see those call outs to these different domains is always nice. Just anytime that a new domain comes up, I really try to dig in and see what it is that domain is used for. So oftentimes you see a lot of things for content delivery networks and things like that, but every now and again you start seeing some of these more suspicious domain names popping up, and sometimes those can be enough of a red flag in and of themselves to launch off an investigation.
So we want to kind of wrap this up right now, and that is we talked a lot about a lot of different areas, but what can you do about it? Again, the threat actors are going to pivot, they're going to move laterally through your network, and who knows where they're going right now. We have a vague idea that potentially 365 could be attacked, but it maybe not. So here's some things you can do about it. And obviously, if you use SolarWinds or Orion products, you have to assume compromise. I mean, 18,000 folks have downloaded this and patched and updated it. So if you use any other SolarWinds products, I would definitely consider mapping your attack surface, doing that threat modeling. I would also, you talk about East-West Netflow. I think we talked a little bit this morning, Forrest, about that. How much value are you really going to get from that East-West Netflow? Any thoughts on that?
Anytime somebody's trying to move laterally, it's being able to track that is very valuable. If all of a sudden you have some system that never talks to a certain file share, and all of a sudden it starts doing that, that's a very big red flag that could indicate something nefarious happening in your network. So definitely a very very high signal indicator. Also, a lot of these are using credential harvesting, so they're trying to get those credentials and then use valid user accounts to access different resources. So having that principle of least privilege is very important in preventing somebody from being able to pivot and get access to additional data that they shouldn't have. Or if all of a sudden you see a user account for somebody that's on vacation, or some long forgotten service account starts trying to reach out all across the network, that's a pretty good sign that something bad is going on there.
There's a lot of other activities that you could potentially go down. And if you do have Orion NMS, you could obviously take that zero trust architecture pathway. You can block it. You can limit access to NMS. But, the threat actors are going to change their IOCs. They're going to retool. They're going to go back. They're watching threat briefings, and they're doing, they're looking at the same information that we're looking at for the most part, and they're going to obviously change their tactics as well. So if you have logs, and a lot of, this is your big thing, right, Forrest? Keeping logs as far back as you can. If you have logs all the way back to March, then you have a great opportunity to do some hunting and forensic looking at going all the way back to that. So that's very helpful as well. All right. And then, kind of wrapping it up, check your 365 stuff. Microsoft has not announced any known compromises, but again, the threat actors are going to pivot. They're going to change. MFA, obviously changing passwords. Doing your extra due diligence is critical at this point. So any final thoughts here for us before we wrap this up?
When in doubt, better safe than sorry. So if you're not sure that something has been impacted, in my view, as long as it's not going to be a massive cost source to the company, if you can roll a system, in my opinion, do it. That way, you're testing your business continuity plans. You're testing your incident response, your ability to recover from failure, and also, in the event that one of these things were breached, hopefully you're able to shore things up before anything really bad happens from it.
Absolutely. And we want to thank you again for joining us. It's been a rough 2 weeks here in the world of cybersecurity, but we hope you got some value out of it. We're doing our best here to try to explain and trying to just really understand and unpackage everything that's going on with this adversary. We'll be back again for another fun podcast. And thanks again, folks, for joining us.
Yep. Have a wonderful rest of your 2020 and take care.